we have with us tonight. Few people realize how arduous and how disagreeable public lecturing is. The public sees the lecturer step out onto the platform in his little white waistcoat and his long-tailed coat and with a false air of a conjurer about him, and they think him happy. After about 10 minutes of his talk, they're tired of him. Most people tire of a lecture in 10 minutes. Clever people can do it in 5. Sensible people never go to lectures at all. This is the first of the lecturer's troubles, the fact that the audience won't come to hear him, that they refuse to turn out in cold weather, that they do not turn out in wet weather, that when the weather is really fine, it is impossible to get them together, that the slightest counter-attraction, a hockey match, a sacred concert, goes to their heads at once. But I pass over the audience. Suppose there is a real audience, and suppose them all duly gathered together. Then it becomes the business of that gloomy gentleman facetiously referred to in the newspaper reports as the genial chairman to put the lecturer to the bad. In 9 cases out of 10 he can do so. Some chairmen indeed develop a great gift for it. Here are 1 or 2 examples from my own experience. "Ladies and gentlemen," said the chairman of a society of a little town in western Ontario to which I had come as a very humbly paid lecturer, "we have with us tonight a gentleman—" Here he made an attempt to read my name on a card, failed to read it, and put the card back in his pocket. "A gentleman who is to lecture to us on—" Here he looked at his card again. "On ancient, I don't very well see what this is. Ancient Britain? Oh, thank you. On ancient Britain, yeah. Now, this is the first of our series of lectures for this winter. The last series, as you all know, was not a success. In fact, we came out to the end of the year with a deficit. So this year we are starting a new line and trying the experiment of cheaper talent." Here the chairman gracefully waved his hand toward me, and there was a certain amount of applause. "And before I sit down," the chairman added, "I'd like to say that I'm sorry to see such a poor turnout tonight, and to ask all those members who haven't paid their dollar to pay it either to me or to Mr. Sibley as they pass out." Let anyone who knows the discomfiture of coming up before an audience on any terms judge how it feels to crawl out in front of them labeled cheaper talent. I began my lecture tours during the First World War to raise money for the relief of the Belgians. In this capacity, I covered a great deal of ground in the years 1915 and 1916. Indeed, the King of the Belgians very generously said that he didn't care how much ground I covered as long as I paid my own expenses. It was while I was pursuing this same exalted purpose that I arrived at a little town in eastern Ontario and found to my horror that I was billed to appear in a church. I was supposed to give readings from my works, and my books are supposed to be of a humorous character. A church hardly seemed the right place to get funny in. I explained my difficulty to the pastor of the church, a very solemn-looking man. He nodded his head slowly and gravely as he grasped my difficulty. "I see," he said, "I see. But I think that I can introduce you to our people in such a way as to make that right." When the time came, he led me up to the pulpit platform of the church just beside and below the pulpit itself, with a reading desk and a big Bible and a shaded light beside it. It was a big church, and the audience, sitting in half-darkness as is customary during a sermon, reached away back into the gloom. The place was packed full and absolutely quiet. Then the pastor spoke. "Dear friends," he said, "I want you to understand that it will be all right to laugh tonight. Let me hear you laugh heartily. Laugh right out, just as much as ever you want to. Because," and here his voice assumed the deep sepulchral tones of the preacher, "when we think of the noble object for which Dr. Leacock appears tonight, we may be assured that the Lord will forgive anyone who will laugh at the professor." I'm sorry to say, however, that none of the audience, even with the plenary absolution in advance, were inclined to take a chance on it. Everybody knows the chairman who comes to the meeting with a very imperfect knowledge as to who or what the lecturer is, and is driven to introduce him by saying, "Our lecturer of the evening is widely recognized as one of the greatest authorities on his subject in the world today. He comes to us from a great distance, and I can assure him that it is a great pleasure to this audience to welcome a man who has done so much to advance the interests of everything as he has." A terrifying type of chairman is the one whose mind is evidently preoccupied and disturbed by some local happening, and who comes onto the platform with a face imprinted with distress. Before introducing the lecturer, he refers in moving tones to the local sorrow, whatever it is. As a prelude to a humorous lecture, this is not gay. Such a chairman fell to my lot one night before a gloomy audience in a London suburb. "As I look about this hall tonight," he began in a doleful whine, "I see many empty seats." Here he stifled a sob. "Nor am I surprised that a great many of our people should prefer tonight to stay quietly at home." I had no clue to what he meant. I merely gathered that some peculiar sorrow must have overwhelmed the town that day. "To many it may seem oddly fitting that after the loss our town has sustained, we should come out here to listen to a humorous lecture." "What's the trouble?" I whispered to a citizen sitting beside me on the platform. "Our oldest resident," he whispered back. "He died this morning." "How old?" 94, he whispered. Meantime, the chairman, with deep sobs in his voice, continued. "We debated in our committee whether or not we should have the lecturer. Had it been a lecturer of another character, our position would have been less difficult." By this time I began to feel like a criminal. "The case would have been different had the lecturer been one that contained information, or that was inspired by some serious purpose, or that could have been of any benefit. But this is not so. We understand that this lecturer, which Mr. Leacock has already given, I believe, 20 or 30 times in England, is not of that class." Here he paused and choked back a sob. "Had our poor friend been spared to us for another 6 years, he would have rounded out the century. But it was not to be. For 2 or 3 years past he has noted that somehow his strength was failing, that for some reason or other he was no longer what he had been. Last month he began to droop. Last week he began to sink. Speech left him last Tuesday. This morning he passed away, and he has gone now, we trust, in safety, where there are no lecturers." The audience was now nearly in tears. The chairman made a visible effort toward firmness and control. "But yet," he continued, "our committee felt that in another sense it was our duty to go on with our arrangements. I think, ladies and gentlemen, that the war has taught us all that it is always our duty to carry on, no matter how hard it may be, no matter what the difficulties and the dangers, we must carry on to the end. For after all, there is an end, and by resolution and patience we can reach it. I will therefore invite Mr. Leacock to deliver to us his humorous lecture, the title of which I have forgotten, but I understand it to be the same lecture which he's already given 30 or 40 times in England." When any lecturer goes across to England from this side of the water, there is naturally a tendency upon the part of the chairman to play upon this fact. This is especially true in the case of a Canadian like myself. The chairman feels that the moment is fitting for one of those great imperial thoughts that bind the British Empire together. But sometimes the expression of the thought falls short of the full glory of the conception. Witness this word-for-word introduction that was used against me by a clerical chairman in a quiet spot in the south of England. "Not so long ago, ladies and gentlemen," said the vicar, "we used to send out to Canada various classes of our community to help build up that country. We sent out our laborers, we sent out our scholars and professors.
Indeed, we even sent out our criminals. And now, with a wave of his hand toward me, they are coming back.